Let's talk about the 7 signs that you may be consuming too much salt. It's very rare to have someone consume too much salt. In reality, the person is really just potassium deficient. So I will explain, but let's just go through these symptoms real quick. The first one is edema in your eyes, in your hands, or your feet or lower legs, because sodium is retaining water and you're becoming waterlogged. Another sign would be you're thirsty. Okay, why you're thirsty? Because your body is telling you you need to drink more water to dilute the excess sodium. Another one is high blood pressure because you're retaining salt in water and that increases more volume in your blood. And you only have so much space. So if we increase the volume, the pressure is going to increase. Then we get headache, probably because of the pressure from the volume of blood in your brain. And then you have restlessness or irritability. And then the last two are nausea and fatigue. Now, it's just important to also now review a sodium deficiency, those symptoms, just so you can compare, because you're going to find out there are more problems with the deficiency than there are with the excess. Let me explain. Number one, if you're deficient in sodium, you're going to feel weak, especially if you try to exercise or climb a hill. Number two, you might have low blood pressure. Why? Because there's just not enough volume of blood because you don't have the sodium to retain the fluid. And number three, you'll have an increase in various neurotransmitters like adrenaline, that's the stress hormone, as well as other hormones, which then can lead to vascular stiffness, which will then increase the blood pressure. But there's another thing that can worsen blood pressure. Low sodium can lead to higher levels of insulin and insulin resistance. This is the unintended consequences of going on a low salt diet. So here you are trying to fix your high blood pressure by lowering your sodium, and then you end up with more insulin, okay, and more insulin resistance, which actually causes high blood pressure. I mean, what you need to know is the most common underlying cause of high blood pressure is insulin resistance because it'll make your arteries very stiff. And there's many things that can contribute to that: a high carb diet, eating too frequently, as well as a low sodium diet. The treatment that they do for high blood pressure is diuretics, which basically cause you to lose sodium as well as potassium. People that are salt sensitive or have symptoms of too much sodium are really potassium deficient. Potassium and sodium always work together, okay? One buffers the other, and you actually need twice as much potassium as you do sodium. But rarely does anyone get that because they don't consume enough foods high in potassium, as in vegetables, salads, etc. You would have to consume at least 7 cups of salad to achieve even a closer number of your potassium that you need. And no, you can't get potassium from eating bananas because one banana equals 300 milligrams. So you would have to consume well over 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 bananas. And then to get all that sugar on top of it is not going to be healthy. So with sodium, you need 2,300 milligrams for an average person. And then for potassium, it's 4,700 milligrams, right? More than twice as much. Now, there's another little piece of this puzzle that I think is also valid and very interesting, and it has to do with insulin. Insulin is a hormone that's triggered by carbs, and insulin will compensate for sodium. Let me explain. Let's say you don't have enough sodium, okay? And so what the body will then do is increase insulin to help retain sodium. And that's why diabetics who normally have a lot of insulin in their body, at least initially if they're a type 2, tend to retain a lot of sodium. So what happens in the kidneys when you lower your salt is that you increase this insulin and you can even create insulin resistance. What do you need to know about this? Glucose, sugar, refined carbs, high carb diet, okay, causes you to retain sodium. And now you know why, through the help of insulin. Now, on top of that, glucose that's stored in your liver and your muscles as glycogen also has a lot of storage of potassium. In other words, it takes potassium to store glucose as glycogen. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, just realize that the higher the carbohydrate in your diet, the more potassium you're going to lock up and store away and become deficient in because that potassium is unavailable. So not only are we going to have like an exaggerated sodium problem retention, we're just not going to have the potassium to buffer it out because that darn glucose is locking up that potassium. And so we have a dietary deficiency problem with potassium, which actually makes you more salt sensitive. It makes sodium be exaggerated. And then on top of that, adding a high carb diet makes everything worse. And this is why diabetics who don't consume enough potassium are really in trouble. They have a lot of swelling. You'll look at their ankles, look at their feet. They're just like really puffy and their eyes are always swollen. Their hands, they can't get their rings off. They can't close their hands. And it's so simple. All they need to do is lower the carbs in their diet and add more potassium. Foods or a good electrolyte with a lot of potassium, and bam, their blood sugars do better and their fluid gets better. And now they're no longer salt sensitive. Don't be afraid of taking salt because we need a certain amount of sodium in the diet as sodium chloride, but not just sodium chloride. We need the whole mineral balance. And that's why you should always consume sea salt. But for those people that have high blood pressure and want to take the salt, but want one extra awesome thing you could do, there's a type of salt out there. It's called Baja Gold salt. It's a type of sea salt with lower amounts of sodium. Okay, let me explain. When you have sea salt, you have to realize that 95% of that sea salt is sodium chloride. And then you have the rest of the minerals and trace minerals, right? Baja Gold salt, it's at a location on the planet where you have the merging of fresh water, which is non sea salt water, with seawater together. We have the salt that accumulates with only 70% sodium chloride and the rest of the other minerals. So when you actually consume the salt, you have a much, much greater amount of these other minerals. And I'm talking about potassium, magnesium, and all the trace minerals, and a little bit less sodium chloride. And it's really delicious on your food. I'll put a link down below for more information on that, but you should know about it. The next most important thing to know is about potassium. And for that information, you have to watch this video right here.